The wind swept across the small private airfield outside Dallas, carrying the smell of rain and aviation fuel through the rows of hangars. Thick gray clouds gathered overhead, warning that a storm would soon arrive. Mechanics hurried from one aircraft to another, hoping to finish their work before the weather became worse. The loud sounds of engines, tools, and radios filled the air, creating the familiar rhythm of another busy day. Among all the workers was Ethan Carter, a quiet aircraft mechanic whose hands were permanently stained with grease and oil. At 38 years old, he had spent nearly 2 decades repairing airplanes, but life had taught him lessons far beyond fixing machines. Every scar on his hands told a story of hard work, while the tired look in his eyes revealed years of sacrifice that no one else noticed. Long before sunrise each morning, Ethan woke to prepare breakfast for his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. He carefully braided her hair, packed her lunch, and walked her to school before reporting to work. When his shift ended, he rushed home to help with homework, cooked dinner, and read bedtime stories before quietly cleaning the kitchen after Lily had fallen asleep. It was a routine he never complained about because everything he did revolved around one person, his daughter. 5 years earlier, Ethan's wife, Emma, had passed away after a sudden illness. Losing her had shattered their family. While Ethan struggled to hide his grief, Lily was too young to understand why her mother never came home. She continued asking questions for months, hoping one day someone would give her an answer that made sense. Even now, Lily sometimes set an extra plate at the dinner table before remembering there was no one to fill the empty chair. On Mother's Day, she still made colorful handmade cards with flowers and hearts drawn across the front. Instead of giving them away, she carefully placed each card inside a small wooden box in her bedroom. Ethan had found that box once while cleaning. He opened it and discovered years of unopened Mother's Day cards, each one simply addressed, "For Mom." He quietly closed the lid and never mentioned it again. That memory stayed with him every single day. As Ethan finished tightening a bolt beneath a small business jet, the peaceful rhythm of the airfield suddenly changed. A convoy of black SUVs raced through the security gate and stopped beside the largest hangar. Workers immediately stopped what they were doing. Some whispered to each other while others simply stared. Only one person traveled with that level of security: Jonathan Hayes. He was one of the wealthiest CEOs in America and the founder of Hayes Aerospace, a company that designed cutting-edge aircraft used around the world. Newspapers described him as brilliant, demanding, and nearly impossible to impress. His business decisions moved markets, and his schedule was planned months in advance. Every minute of his day was worth thousands of dollars. Jonathan stepped out of the SUV wearing an expensive tailored suit despite the storm clouds overhead. His expression showed clear frustration as he walked toward his sleek private jet. Several engineers surrounded the aircraft with worried faces. "The hydraulic system keeps failing." "Sir?" one engineer explained nervously. Jonathan looked at his watch. "I have a board meeting in New York in 4 hours. Another engineer shook his head. "We've inspected everything we can think of." Jonathan's voice became sharper. "Then think harder." This tension spread across the hangar. No one wanted to disappoint the powerful businessman standing before them. One engineer crawled beneath the aircraft for another inspection. Another checked the cockpit systems again. A third reviewed diagnostic readings on his tablet. Nothing worked. The warning light remained on. The aircraft refused to clear itself for flight. After nearly another hour of unsuccessful repairs, the airport manager slowly approached Jonathan. "There may be one more person who can help." Jonathan crossed his arms impatiently. "Who?" The manager pointed toward Ethan, who was quietly organizing his toolbox across the hangar. "Him." Jonathan looked across the room. The mechanic wore faded work clothes with patches sewn over old tears. His boots were scratched and covered in years of dust and oil. There was nothing about Ethan's appearance that suggested extraordinary talent. Jonathan frowned. "My engineers graduated from the finest universities in the country, and you're telling me this mechanic can succeed where they failed?" The manager simply smiled. "He listens to airplanes differently." Jonathan let out a small laugh. "Interesting answer." Ethan walked over calmly, removing his work gloves. "You wanted someone to look at the plane?" Jonathan studied him carefully. "You're Ethan Carter?" "Yes." "You've repaired private jets before?" "A few." Jonathan looked unconvinced. My engineers have spent hours searching for the problem. What makes you think you'll find it? Ethan answered without arrogance. Machines don't care about titles. They only tell the truth. Several nearby mechanics exchanged surprised looks. Jonathan stared at Ethan for a moment before finally stepping aside. You have exactly 1 hour. If you fix my airplane, he paused deliberately, I'll grant you one wish. The surrounding workers immediately began whispering, one wish from a billionaire. The possibilities seemed endless. Someone quietly muttered, I'd ask for $5 million. Another said, I'd ask for a luxury home. A third whispered, he could ask for his own aviation company. Jonathan noticed their excitement but kept his attention on Ethan. So? Do we have a deal? Ethan simply nodded. I'll do my best. Without another word, he grabbed a flashlight and slowly walked beneath the massive aircraft. Unlike the others, Ethan didn't begin removing panels immediately. Instead, he listened. He rested one hand against the aircraft's metal frame, closed his eyes for several seconds, and gently tapped different sections with a small inspection tool. The engineers watched with confusion. What is he doing? One whispered. Another shrugged. I have no idea. Ethan carefully examined each hydraulic line before moving toward the backup control compartment. He checked every connector, every cable, and every pressure valve without rushing. Nearly 20 minutes passed. Finally, a small smile appeared on his face. He climbed back out and wiped his hands with a cloth. Jonathan walked over. Well? Ethan pointed toward a hidden access panel. The hydraulic pump isn't failing, one engineer interrupted. We already replaced it. I know. The problem is a cracked pressure sensor behind the emergency backup control unit. The engineer immediately shook his head. We checked every sensor, Ethan calmly replied. You checked the primary system. You didn't check the emergency pressure sensor. Another engineer frowned. There isn't enough space back there. There is if you remove the secondary access panel first, Ethan answered, curious. The lead engineer fetched his tools. Within minutes, the hidden panel came off. Everyone crowded around. The flashlight beam settled on a tiny pressure sensor tucked deep behind several cables. Silence filled the hangar. Running across the sensor was a thin hairline crack almost invisible to the naked eye. No one spoke. The engineer slowly turned toward Ethan. How? Ethan smiled softly. When hydraulic pressure changes, the vibration sounds different. I heard it. The replacement sensor was installed immediately. The engines started. One by one. Every warning light disappeared from the cockpit display. The aircraft was fully operational. The engineers stood frozen in disbelief. Jonathan looked at the cleared instrument panel before turning toward Ethan. For the first time that day, the billionaire smiled. You just saved me millions of dollars. He extended his hand. A promise is a promise. I'll grant your wish. Every worker in the hangar stopped to watch. Some expected Ethan to ask for enough money to retire. Others believed he would ask for a promotion inside Hayes Aerospace. Jonathan even reached into his jacket and pulled out his checkbook. I'm ready, he said confidently. Ethan looked down for a moment. Slowly, he reached into his own worn wallet. Inside was an old photograph. It showed a younger Ethan standing beside his smiling wife, Emma, while little Lily sat on her mother's shoulders, laughing beneath a bright summer sky. He stared at the picture for several silent seconds before putting it away. Then he looked directly at Jonathan. I don't want your money, the billionaire blinked. No? Ethan shook his head. I don't need a mansion. I don't need a promotion. I don't need expensive cars. Jonathan lowered the checkbook. Then what do you want? Ethan took a slow breath. His voice became quieter. My daughter... He paused as emotion filled his eyes. Needs a mom. The entire hangar became completely silent. Even the storm outside seemed to disappear beneath the weight of those 5 simple words. No one had expected that answer. Not the billionaire, not the engineers, not the mechanics. Every person standing there suddenly realized that the greatest wish wasn't about wealth at all. It was about a little girl who still carried years of unopened Mother's Day cards in a small wooden box, waiting for someone she could finally call mom.